Last days of King Antiochus 4. Now King Antiochus passed through the upper countries and heard that Elima in Persia was a splendid city for its wealth in silver and gold. Its temple contained great wealth, with shields of gold, breastplates, and weaponry left there by Alexander, the son of Philip, the Macedonian king who first ruled over the Greeks. So he came and sought to defeat the city and take spoils, but he failed because his plot was uncovered by the men of the city. They confronted and fought against him, and he fled and retreated from there very discouraged, and went back to Babylon. Then a man came and told him while he was still in Persia that his army which had invaded the land of Judah was put to flight, that Lysias had gone first with a strong army, but had been put to shame before Israel, that Israel was growing strong by the weapons, supplies, and abundant spoils they had taken from the armies they had conquered. Moreover, they had pulled down the abomination he built on top of the altar in Jerusalem, and they had encircled the sanctuary with high walls as it had before, as well as Beth-zur, his hometown. When the king received this report, he was shocked and greatly shaken. He fell upon his bed and was sick with grief, because matters had not gone for him as he hoped. King Antiochus lay there several days, for deepening grief worsened his condition. He concluded he was about to die. Thus he called together his friends, saying, "Sleep has eluded my eyes, and anxiety has devastated my heart. I ask myself, what is the stress I have come to, and into what sea of troubles am I immersed? For I was kind and loved as a ruler. But now I recall the evils I did in Jerusalem, for I took all the silver and gold vessels, and sent to destroy those who lived in Judah for no good reason. I know that because of these things, evils have found me, and behold, I am perishing with deep grief in a foreign land." Succession of Antiochus v. He then summoned Philip, one of his friends, and set him over his entire kingdom. He gave him his crown and his robe and ring, that he could take charge of his son Antiochus and raise him to rule. Thus Antiochus the king died in the 149th year. When Lysias found out the king had reposed, he established Antiochus his son to reign. Lysias had raised him from youth and called him Eupator. Siege of the citadel. Now men from the citadel were confining Israel to the area around the sanctuary. They were attempting by whatever means to injure them, and to bring strength to the Gentiles. So he gathered all the men to defeat them. They assembled the army and attacked the city in the 150th year. He also built engines of war and other instruments of battle. But some of these enemies escaped from the enclosure, and some ungodly Israelites sided with them. They approached the king, saying, "How long will it be until you render a judgment to avenge our brothers? We were pleased to serve your father, and to follow what he said and obey his orders. Because of this the sons of our people attacked the citadel and became our enemies. Besides this, they killed as many of us as they found, and our inheritances were taken away. But they have not stretched out their hand against us alone, but also against all the lands on their borders, and behold, today they have surrounded the citadel in Jerusalem to defeat it. They have strengthened the sanctuary and Beth-zur as well. So unless you quickly overtake them, they will do worse things than these, and you will be unable to stop them." Campaign of Antiochus v. and Lysias. The king was angered greatly when he heard this, so he assembled all his friends, the military leaders, and those who ruled. Armies of mercenaries came to him as well from other nations and from various islands of the seas. So the number of his armies was 100,000 foot soldiers, 20,000 cavalry, and 32 elephants trained for battle. They arrived through Idumea and marched against Beth-zur, fighting for many days and building engines of war. But Israel went out, set them on fire, and battled heroically. Judas then marched out from the citadel and set up camp at Beth Zechariah, across from the king's camp. The next morning the king rose at dawn and led his army on a forced march on the highway to Beth Zechariah. His soldiers prepared themselves for warfare and blew the trumpets. They also showed the elephants the juice of grapes and mulberries to ready them for the campaign. Then they stationed the elephants among the phalanxes and set alongside each animal 1,000 men, covered with coats of mail and with bronze helmets on their heads. 500 horsemen were chosen and assigned to each elephant. These positioned themselves beforehand wherever the animal was, and wherever it went. They rode alongside and never left it alone. Sturdy covered wooden towers were strapped upon each elephant by a special harness, and 4 armed men fought from inside each tower with its Indian driver. They positioned the remainder of the horsemen on each side, on the 2 flanks of the forces, disturbing the enemy while they themselves were protected by the phalanxes. As the sun shined on the golden and bronze shields, the hills glistened from them and lit up like a flaming fire. While one sector of the king's forces was stretched out on the high hills and some were on the plain, they marched on steadfastly in good order. Everyone trembled when they heard the sounds of the soldiers as they marched along, and the clanging of their weapons. For the army was massive and very strong. But Judas drew near with his army in battle formation, and 600 of the king's men fell. Then Eleazar, called Avran, saw one of the elephants covered with royal armor. It was taller than the rest, and he reasoned the king was riding it. So he laid down his life to rescue his people and to make an everlasting name for himself. He ran boldly into the center of the phalanx, killing soldiers to the right and left, and they got out of his way on both flanks. Then he crawled under the elephant, struck it from beneath, and killed it. It fell to the ground on top of him, and he died there. When the Israelites saw the royal might and the fierce attack of the troops, they turned away from them in flight. But the soldiers of the king's army went up to Jerusalem to attack them, and the king set up camp in Judea and on Mount Zion. He reached a peace accord with the men of Bethzur, who evacuated the city because they had no food there to withstand a siege, for it was a sabbatical year for the land. So the king captured Bethzur and set a guard there to secure it. He then set a camp opposite the sanctuary for several days and built siege towers, engines of war which threw fire and stones, machines to fire off arrows, and catapults. The defenders also made engines of war to match theirs. So they battled several days, but with no food stored up, because it was the 7th year, and the men who survived in Judea against the Gentiles had eaten the remaining provisions. Few men remained in the sanctuary, for hunger had overtaken them. They scattered, each to his own place. Now Lysias got word that Philip, whom Antiochus the king had chosen while still alive to raise Antiochus his son to rule, had returned from Persia and Media with the armies that had gone there with the king, and that he was trying to gain control of the kingdom. So Lysias decided immediately to send a message to the king, the commanders, and the men, saying, "We grow weaker each day, our food supply is running out, the force we are fighting against is strong, and governing the kingdom puts pressure on us. Therefore, let us come to agreement with these men and have peace with them and their nation. We should arrange for them to live by their laws as before, for it was because of their laws which we abolished that they became furious and did all the things they have done." This word pleased the king and the commanders, so he sent an offer of peace to the Israelites, which they accepted. Thus the king and the commanders gave them their oath. On these conditions the Israelites evacuated the fortress. But when the king came to Mount Zion and saw the fortification of the place, he broke his promise and commanded his men to pull down the surrounding wall. Then he left hastily and came back to Antioch. There he discovered Philip in charge, so he attacked him and captured the city by force. Notes from the previous page. 6:1-4 Antiochus tried to steal the famed temple treasures of the Alexandrians but was thwarted by the men of Elima, the part of Elam not controlled by the Seleucids. He was after his hero Alexander the Great's armor, said to be housed in the temple. 6:34-37 Lysias chose elephants not only for their innate ability as fighters, but for use in frightening the Jews, who had not encountered them before. In v35, phalanxes are heavily armed troops marching in close array, and coats of mail refers to flexible armor, consisting of a mesh of interlinked metal rings used defensively in battle. 6:43-46 Eleazar bravely tried to kill Antiochus and overcome the Jews' fear of the elephants. Demetrius I becomes king. Demetrius the son of Seleucus set forth from Rome in the 151st year, sailed with a few men into the city by the sea, and reigned there. As he entered the royal house of his fathers, his army seized Antiochus and Lysias and brought them to him. When he became aware of this action, he said, "Do not show me their faces." So the soldiers put them to death, and Demetrius occupied the throne of his kingdom. Then all the lawless and ungodly men of Israel came to him. Alcimus, who wanted to be a priest, led them. They brought charges against the people before the king, saying, "Judas and his brothers have destroyed all your friends and scattered us from our land. Therefore, send a man you trust, and let him see all the destruction he did to us and to the country of the king. Then let him bring punishment to them and all who serve them." Bacchides and Alcimus control Judah. The king then appointed Bacchides, one of his friends, who ruled the province of beyond the river, for he was prominent in the kingdom and loyal to the king. Then he sent him and the ungodly Alcimus, whom he appointed to the priesthood, and ordered him to avenge the sons of Israel. They marched on with a large army and came into the land of Judah, and sent envoys to Judas and his brothers with peaceful words full of deceit. But they did not heed their words, for they noticed they came with a large army. Then a delegation of scribes was sent to meet with Alcimus and Bacchides to request justice. The Hasidians were the first among the sons of Israel to seek peace with them. For they said, "A man, a priest from the seed of Aaron, came with their forces, and he will not do us wrong." The priests spoke peacefully to them and promised them, saying, "We will not seek to injure you or your friends." They believed him, but he overtook 60 of their men and put them to death in one day, according to the word which was written. They poured out the flesh of our saints and their blood around Jerusalem. But there was no one to bury them. Then fear and trembling fell upon all the people, for they said, "There is no truth and uprightness in them." For they violated the promise and oath they swore. So Bacchides departed from Jerusalem and marched to Bethzaith. He sent for and captured many of the soldiers who deserted him, and some of the people, and he slaughtered them at the great well. He put Alcimus in charge of the region and left an army with him to serve him. Then Bacchides returned to the king. Alcimus then strove for the high priesthood, and all who harassed their people also gathered with him. They took control of the country of Judah and damaged Israel greatly. Now Judah saw all the evil Alcimus and those with him had done among the sons of Israel. It was worse than what the Gentiles did. Thus Judas departed to all the regions surrounding Judea and took vengeance on the men who had deserted. He forbade those in the city to journey out to the countryside. But when Alcimus realized Judas and his followers were growing strong and knew that he could not prevail against them, he went back. and brought evil charges against them before the king. Nicanor marches on Israel. The king then sent Nicanor, one of his renowned commanders who hated and disdained Israel, and ordered him to get rid of the people. Nicanor came up to Jerusalem with a large army, and he sent Judas and his brothers peaceful words full of deceit, saying, "Let there be no quarrel between us. I will come peacefully with a few men to see you in person." So he approached Judas, and they greeted each other peacefully. But the adversaries prepared to seize Judas. Then Judas was aware that Nicanor had come with deceit, and he feared him. So he did not care to meet him again. When Nicanor learned his plot had been discovered, he went into battle with Judas at Kaphar Salamah. Some 500 of Nicanor's soldiers fell, the remainder fled to the city of David. After this, Nicanor went up to Mount Zion. Then some priests came out of the sanctuary, along with some elders of the people, to greet him in peace, showing him the whole burnt offering which they had sacrificed on behalf of the king. However, he mocked and ridiculed them. He defiled them and spoke with arrogance to them. He also swore an oath angrily, saying, "Unless Judas and his troops are delivered into my hands now, then if I come back in peace, I will set this house on fire." Then he stormed out in great rage. The priests then entered and stood facing the altar and the sanctuary. They wept and cried out, "You chose this place to be called by your name, that it might be a house of prayer and supplication for your people. Take vengeance on this man and on his soldiers, and let them die by the sword. Remember their blasphemies and let them be alive no longer." Soon Nicanor left Jerusalem and camped at Beth-horon, and the army of Syria joined him. But Judas took position in Adasah with 3,000 troops. Judas prayed, saying, "When the ambassadors from the king uttered blasphemy, your angel went forth and struck 185,000 of the Assyrians. Crush also this army before us today, and let the others know that he spoke blasphemy against your sanctuary, and judge him according to his malice." Nicanor falls in battle. So the armies faced off in war the 13th day of the month Adar, and Nicanor's army was scattered. He himself was the first to fall in the war. When his soldiers saw Nicanor die, they dropped their weapons and ran. Israel even chased them a day's journey from Adasah as far as Gezerah. As they pursued them, they kept blowing the trumpets, sounding the battle call. Then the Israelites went out from all the villages around Judea and outflanked the adversaries. They drove them back to the pursuing army, and they all fell by the sword. Not one of them survived. Then Israel captured the spoils and their possessions. They even beheaded Nicanor and severed his right hand, which he had stretched out arrogantly. They carried them and put them on display just outside Jerusalem. So the people were very glad. And they celebrated that day as a day of great joy. A decree came forth to celebrate this day at the same time every year, on the 13th day of Adar. Thus the land of Judah had peace for several days. Notes from the previous page. 653 Some of the Jewish forces remaining in Judea barely held out for lack of food. God had commanded them to leave the earth fallow every 7th year, Exodus 23:10, 11, so they had little surplus. 7:1-4 Demetrius I, reigned 162 to 150 BC, the son of Emperor Seleucus IV, assassinated by Antiochus IV, was sent to Rome under the Treaty of Apamea and kept there by the Senate after they repeatedly refused to let him return home. Polybius. He escaped to the Syrian coast with the help of Polybius and his friend Manilius, an envoy of Ptolemy VI. Philometor of Egypt. Once in Tripolis, Demetrius set himself up as the true Seleucid emperor, Josephus. 7:5 High priest Alcimus was accepted by the Hasidic Jews for his Aaronic background and elected by Demetrius, or possibly earlier by Lysias, for his Hellenistic sympathies. 7:23 Judas refused to recognize a high priest appointed by Demetrius. 7:26-49 Nicanor was one of those who had escaped from Rome with Demetrius. Josephus. His death occurred on the 13th day of Adar, v 49, roughly March, in 161 BC and is still observed as the Day of Nicanor.